All right, let's dive into a book that really gets you thinking, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, yeah, this one is powerful.
We're going deep into the excerpts we have, focusing on how he found meaning in, well, unimaginable suffering.
Yeah, I mean, specifically in Nazi concentration camps.
It's a heavy topic, but it makes you think, how do people survive such hardship and find a reason to not just live, but to truly keep going?
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Frankl, a psychiatrist who went through those horrors himself,
Yeah.
he didn't just write about, resilience. He gave us a whole framework for finding meaning in the darkest moments.
Exactly. And it comes down to this idea that life is a constant quest for meaning, not just about pleasure or, power.
Exactly.
He had three ways to find that meaning: work, love, and having the courage to face suffering head on.
Really powerful stuff.
It's mind-blowing that he saw this playing out even in the camp.
You know, right? Like, how could someone find meaning in a place designed to strip you of everything?
Yeah, it seems impossible.
But that's the core of what Frankl is saying.
Okay.
He lived it. He saw that even when you lose everything, you still have the freedom to choose your attitude.
That's powerful.
He tells this story, it's chilling, about a Nazi officer who strips a man of all his possessions, throws them away, and says,
Gosh.
"Good, now you have nothing."
I'm getting chills just thinking about that.
Right.
It's so dehumanizing.
Absolutely. But even then, Frankl says, we always have something left, the power to choose how we respond.
We always have a choice.
Always.
It makes you think about times you've faced really tough situations, Did it crush you, or did you find a way to react differently? Maybe even found strength you didn't know you had?
Exactly. We all have those moments.
You see that choice so clearly in Frankl's life, too.
Oh, absolutely.
He could have escaped to the U.S. when the Nazis took over Austria, but it meant leaving his parents behind.
Can you imagine that weight?
Oh, it'd be impossible.
It's a decision most of us will thankfully never have to make.
Right, and in that agonizing moment, he finds a piece of marble from a synagogue that had been destroyed. It had a Hebrew letter on it from the Ten Commandments. Honor thy father and thy mother.
Powerful.
He called it a hint from heaven, and that solidified his decision to stay.
Wow. To stay even with that threat
I know. Talk about a test of values.
really puts things in perspective.
To understand his insights, though, we need to get what he endured.
For sure.
He broke down concentration camp life into 3 phases.
3 distinct phases, yeah.
I remember him talking about new prisoners arriving at Auschwitz,
Yeah.
seeing these other prisoners who almost looked normal.
That was the first phase, shock. That disbelief that this was actually happening. But that sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
It was a mirage. He called it a delusion of reprieve. It's this thing where people cling to hope, even when facing, well, imminent danger.
Makes sense. Your brain trying to protect itself.
But it often blinded newcomers to the horrors ahead.
It's like the mind protecting itself from being totally overwhelmed by terror.
Exactly, a defense mechanism.
So after the shock, what came next?
Adjustment, phase 2. A chilling routine sets in. Survival becomes the only thing that matters.
I can only imagine.
Frankl describes a selection process. Prisoners sent to their deaths within hours of arriving.
Wow, just hours.
Imagine the impact on those who were, spared.
It's so hard to fathom.
He mentions humor during this phase.
Humor. I can't imagine finding anything funny in that.
Gallows humor, it was a coping mechanism,
Okay.
a way to take back some control in a situation where they had so little.
Right, that makes sense.
Even during those first showers at Auschwitz, stripped naked, totally vulnerable, he describes this strange humor washing over them.
It's like laughing in the face of dehumanization. Amazing.
Yeah, it really speaks to resilience. But he's not romanticizing it.
Oh, no, of course not.
He's clear about the conditions. Constant hunger, no sleep, filth, disease.
Just awful.
It had a huge impact on them psychologically.
He talks about prisoners just huddled together, talking about food.
Right.
It seems almost mundane given everything else.
But those conversations were about more than just, satisfying hunger.
Right.
It was a way to connect, hold on to hope, imagine a future where they could enjoy those simple things again.
That's really beautiful.
And it gets at Frankl's point about the relativity of suffering.
Yeah, okay.
He describes prisoners being joyful about being sent to Dachau instead of Mauthausen.
Which was known to be much worse.
Exactly. So even in that horror, there were shades of worse and slightly less worse.
But if suffering is relative, how do we find meaning in it? It's not about, glorifying pain, right?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's recognizing that even in suffering, there's a chance for growth, for discovering strength and purpose within.
Inner strength.
He tells a story about a young woman who knew she was dying, and she found meaning in comforting others.
Wow, even facing death, she found a purpose beyond her own suffering.
Exactly, and it leads to one of Frankl's most interesting ideas. Instead of asking, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
He says we should imagine life as asking us,
Asking us what?
what are you going to do with this situation? What kind of person will you choose to be?
Wow.
It totally flips the script, you know?
Yeah.
It's not about finding an answer out there, but how we respond to what life throws at us.
It's not static, it's something we create.
Exactly. And our answers aren't in words, but in our actions.
Our choices.
It's not about finding a universal truth, but taking responsibility for our choices,
Yeah.
shaping our destinies, even with these immense challenges.
That's really powerful. Not some static thing, but something we create by choosing.
That's Frankl.
And that's where logotherapy comes in.
Yes. He developed this whole therapeutic approach to help people find meaning.
It's different from psychoanalysis, right?
It was a big deal back then. Psychoanalysis,
Right.
focusing on unconscious drives and conflicts, but logotherapy,
Yeah.
it's about confronting these huge existential questions,
Okay.
helping people connect with their values and find meaning in the present moment.
Like right now, not dwelling on the past.
Exactly. He tells this moving story about a grieving mother who lost her child,
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
struggling to find a reason to go on.
Of course.
And through psychodrama, it's a technique in logotherapy.
Yeah.
She imagined herself on her deathbed, looking back on her life.
Wow, what a perspective shift.
It helped her see that her life was full of meaning, even with the pain and loss.
Imagining the end helped her see the value of what she had already lived.
Powerful stuff.
That's incredible.
That realization gave her strength to move forward, and it highlights another key part of Frankl's philosophy. Freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin.
He had that famous quote about the Statue of Liberty, right?
He did. He said, freedom without responsibility, it just becomes meaningless, you know? True freedom comes from knowing our choices have consequences, that we're accountable for how we live.
So freedom gives us the power to choose, but responsibility guides those choices towards meaning.
Exactly. And Frankl believed even in the most degrading circumstances, like the camps, we still have that potential for meaningful moral choices.
He witnessed both swine and saints there.
Yes, powerful statement, right?
What did he mean by that?
He saw people, even in that inhumane environment, choose compassion, courage, selflessness,
Well,
while others chose cruelty and selfishness.
it's hard to believe.
Their choices define them, not their conditions.
It's a stark reminder that we always have a choice, even when we feel like we have nothing left.
And that act of choosing, that's the heart of Frankl's message.
That's profound.
Powerful stuff, that idea of inner freedom.
Yeah, so it's not about pretending suffering doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's about finding that freedom inside, even when everything else is gone.
Exactly. In those choices, that's where our character shows, our resilience, our capacity for meaning. And Frankl doesn't just theorize, he gives us actual ways to apply this stuff in our everyday lives.
That's what I was hoping we'd get to. Like, if someone's listening, going through something tough,
Yeah.
how can they use these ideas?
One technique, it's called dereflection.
Okay.
It's about shifting our focus away from our own problems towards something bigger than us.
Like the woman who comforted others even as she was dying.
Exactly. When we fixate on our suffering, it eats us up. But when we engage with something meaningful, work, a creative project, connecting with others,
Yeah.
that suffering takes on a new proportion.
So it's not about ignoring the pain, but finding something that gives us purpose, gets us out of our own heads. What else is there?
There's paradoxical intention.
Okay.
It uses humor and a bit of reverse psychology to overcome anxieties.
So how does that work?
Let's say you have insomnia. You're always worried about not falling asleep.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Instead of forcing yourself to sleep, which just makes the anxiety worse,
Right.
paradoxical intention says try to stay awake as long as you can.
Wait, so you're telling me to try to stay awake when I'm already struggling to sleep?
It sounds crazy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But by embracing the fear, by trying to do the thing you're afraid of,
I see.
you break that anxiety cycle, and often sleep comes easier.
It's like outsmarting your fear by leaning into it. That's great.
It can work for all sorts of things. Phobias, performance anxiety.
It all comes back to that idea we talked about. We have more control over our minds than we think.
Exactly.
Frankl didn't shy away from the big questions either.
He went deep, yeah.
How do we find meaning in a world that often feels meaningless? Especially after going through, immense suffering.
So many of us grapple with that.
Yeah, how do we find meaning when life feels temporary, fleeting?
Frankl says instead of fearing that, We should see it as motivation to live fully in the present.
Okay.
He compares a pessimist to someone watching their calendar get thinner each day with dread.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
But then he contrasts that with someone who carefully files away each day, taking note of their experiences.
They're savoring it.
They look back on a rich life and approach the future with gratitude, not fear.
That's a powerful shift. Instead of focusing on time slipping away,
Yeah.
we focus on the richness of what we've lived.
And those experiences, the joy, the love, even the suffering, they become part of us. They shape us.
You're not lost even when the moment's gone.
They're woven into who we are, and that's something no one can take away.
That's really beautiful.
That perspective
Yeah.
can be so empowering, especially in hard times.
Yeah, Frankl faced one of the most horrific times in history, and he came out with a message of hope.
Right, a belief in the potential for good, even in darkness.
It's so relevant today. Our world is full of suffering, injustice, uncertainty.
How do we find meaning in that?
Exactly. That's the question.
And Frankl reminds us that even in all of that, we can choose our attitude, make a difference.
We still have agency.
He challenges this idea of pandeterminism, the belief that we're controlled by outside forces with no real freedom.
So it's not denying the impact of our environment, but seeing that we still have inner freedom.
Precisely. He acknowledges biology, psychology, our social environment, all of it.
Yeah.
But he argues we always have a choice in how we respond. We're not just victims of circumstance.
We can transcend those circumstances through our choices.
That's it.
He saw that play out in the camps, right?
He did. People facing unimaginable things, choosing compassion, courage, selflessness.
While others chose the opposite.
It shows that we always have a choice, even when we feel like we don't.
And that choice, it defines us.
As humans.
Frankl wasn't just a philosopher, he was a clinician.
He was in the trenches, helping people.
He dedicated his life to helping people find meaning through logotherapy.
Yes, his life's work.
And logotherapy, it's different from traditional psychoanalysis because it says our primary drive isn't pleasure, it's the search for meaning.
That's the core of it.
It's not about avoiding pain or seeking comfort,
No,
but finding what gives our lives purpose, direction.
that's it.
And he believed everyone can find it, even those facing, mental illness or huge challenges.
Everyone has that potential.
So how does it work? What does logotherapy look like in practice?
One of the main techniques is Socratic dialogue.
Oh, like Socrates from philosophy.
Exactly. It's a method of questioning that helps people uncover their own values and beliefs.
Remind me what that dialogue is like.
It's about asking the right questions, not providing answers.
Leading them to their own insights.
The therapist guides the person, but they find their own truth.
So it's not about telling them what to think, it's helping them discover it for themselves.
Exactly. And then there's dereflection, which we touched on earlier.
Right, shifting our focus away from the problem.
Redirecting our attention to something meaningful outside of ourselves.
It gives us a new perspective.
Not denying our problems, but finding purpose, pulling us out of that self-absorption.
Yeah, Frankl also talked about responsibility for our choices and actions.
He really emphasized that.
It seems central to his thinking.
It's essential for a meaningful life.
Not just finding meaning, but creating it.
Through our choices, our actions, how we respond to suffering.
It's active.
It is. We've talked about meaning in tough situations, but what about everyday life?
Most of us aren't facing, thankfully, concentration camps.
That's a great point. Frankl believed meaning can be found in the ordinary,
In the everyday.
the mundane stuff.
So we don't need some big event to give our lives purpose.
Right.
It's those small sparks of meaning in our routines, our relationships, work.
He even argues that the most meaningful moments can come from experiencing beauty, goodness, truth in the world around us.
It's not just what we do,
No,
but how we see and experience the world.
appreciating those simple things, nature, a stranger's kindness, a shared meal.
Yeah, the little things.
Now, Frankl also talks about love as a source of meaning.
Love, that's interesting. What kind of love?
He sees it as the ultimate expression of going beyond ourselves,
Okay.
connecting with something greater.
So he's not just talking about the physical,
Not just instinct, it's a love based on deep understanding
and acceptance.
of another person, willing to sacrifice to give without expecting anything back.
Real deep love.
A love that respects, admires, wants to help the other person grow.
So love isn't just about feeling good or finding a partner.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about connecting to something larger, finding meaning and purpose in that connection with another person.
Beautifully said.
And he believed everyone can experience that kind of love, regardless of their situation.
It's available to all of us.
That's really hopeful.
There's one more concept, the will to meaning.
Okay, what's that?
Frankl believed this is innate, just as basic as the will to pleasure or power.
Like a driving
It's
force.
already there, we don't have to learn it.
Wow, so it's always there, pushing us to seek purpose, significance.
It is.
But what if that will to meaning is, frustrated when we can't find our purpose?
You believe that can lead to all sorts of problems,
Mm.
anxiety, depression, even aggression.
It's not just feeling lost. It really affects us.
Deeply.
And that's where logotherapy comes in.
To help address that, to reconnect people with their will to meaning.
And he wrote about all of this, right? His experiences,
He
logotherapy.
did. Man's Search for Meaning, his most famous work.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Millions of copies sold. A classic.
It's amazing it came from such suffering. It really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
The power of finding meaning in the darkest times.
And it still resonates with people today.
It does, challenging us to look deeper at the meaning of life, our place in it.
Sounds like something we all need to read.
We've covered a lot about Frankl's ideas, logotherapy. What resonates most with you?
His emphasis on choice, it's unwavering. Even in the worst situations, we can choose our attitude, how we respond.
How we exist in the world.
And that act of choosing, that's what gives our lives meaning.
It's not about our circumstances, but how we relate to them. Frankl lived that.
He did. He chose to find meaning in unimaginable suffering and helped others do the same.
And that message still resonates, offering hope in a world that often feels chaotic, meaningless.
So if you're listening and feeling lost, remember Frankl's words, the search for meaning is never truly over.
We always have that power to choose our attitude, create meaning.
To survive that and then find meaning. It's remarkable.
What's even more amazing is that he didn't just stop there with his own survival. He helped others find meaning too.
Even in the camps.
Even there, he became this beacon of hope,
Yeah.
reminding people of their humanity, their capacity for good.
Makes you think, what are we capable of when pushed to our absolute limits,
Right. Do we rise to the occasion or do we fall apart?
It's a big question.
Frankl throws down a challenge for us. It's easy to talk about resilience, finding meaning when things are good. But what about when things get really bad? Do we give up or dig deep and find that strength?
He doesn't give us easy answers.
No, not at all.
He wants us to engage in this search, to really confront life's big questions, and then to make choices that show our values, our humanity.
Absolutely.
One thing that struck me, his emphasis on personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Like we are responsible for our own lives, even when it feels like so much is out of control.
That can be a tough message to hear, especially these days.
It's so easy to blame everything else, right?
Oh yeah, it's my genes, my upbringing, the government, society.
But Frankl's saying, nope, you always have a choice.
We might be limited by our circumstances, but that doesn't mean choice is gone.
We can choose how we think, how we feel, how we act, even when facing tough stuff.
It's powerful.
And that choice, that's what shapes the meaning we find.
It's not about waiting for meaning to just show up. We have to create it.
By choosing.
By acting, by responding, and that can feel overwhelming,
No, absolutely. Finding meaning when you're hurting, when you feel lost, it can't be easy.
It's a struggle. But Frankl believed that struggle, that search, it's what makes us human.
It gives our lives depth, right? Makes it all matter.
And it connects us to something bigger, beyond just ourselves.
Now, some people say Frankl's ideas are too focused on the individual.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
They say he doesn't care about social justice or collective action.
It's a critique, for sure.
But just because he focuses on individual meaning doesn't mean he ignored social and political realities.
No, he actually advocated for addressing injustice, creating a more humane world.
So it's not one or the other.
Right.
It's about acknowledging both individual and the collective responsibility.
Working on both levels, personal and political, to build a world where everyone can live a meaningful life.
That makes a lot of sense. So for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, what can they do? How do they find meaning?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Especially because most of us aren't facing, concentration camps.
Thankfully. No.
The first step, I think, is realizing that searching for meaning, it's a journey. It's not a destination.
It's ongoing.
You're always exploring, discovering.
It's not always pretty either.
No, it can be messy, but it's worth it.
There are so many ways to help ourselves along the way.
Oh yeah, finding work that matters, building strong relationships, getting out in nature, appreciating beauty, being grateful.
All of that connects us to something larger.
And remember, it's not about reaching some big goal or endpoint.
It's about those little moments of joy, of purpose, even in the ordinary stuff.
Everyday things.
Even in suffering, there's a chance for growth, learning, and yes, even meaning.
Well said. We've covered a lot in this deep dive into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
His ideas about finding meaning amidst suffering, they apply to all of us, even if our lives aren't that extreme.
If he found meaning in Auschwitz,
It's almost impossible to imagine.
then we can find it too, no matter what challenges we face.
Absolutely. He reminds us that even in the darkest times, we have that power to choose our attitude, create meaning.
So, keep the conversation going, think about his ideas, see how they fit into your own search for meaning.
This has been a deep dive into the source material. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep diving deep.